Hello, my name is Jay Simmons. I am a software engineer at Microsoft. I work in the Active Directory team located here in Redmond, Washington. We've been working hard to build a new product, a new version of the product known as Local Administrator Password Solution, aka LAPS. We've been getting a lot of customer questions about this product, and I'm here today to give you some insights and a little bit of a deep dive into what we're bringing to you and what it's going to have. So just a brief agenda before we get started. I'll be going over background, where we're coming from. I'll be talking about the goals we have for this new feature, some insights into the new Azure Active Directory features, insights into the new on-premise Active Directory features. We've got some easy migration features as well, and then we'll end with a quick wrap-up. So many of you are going to be already familiar with the existing product known as LAPS, but I do want to go through it very briefly. The whole purpose of this technology is to store and manage the password for a local administrator account on a device. And every time the password is stored or rotated, rather, it is stored in the directory. Now, why is this useful? First of all, it's useful for protecting against pass the hash style attacks. So if every device in an enterprise has the same password for the local administrator account, as soon as an attacker learns that password, they have got access to all of the devices. That's very bad, obviously, and it makes really good sense to randomize that password on an ongoing and periodic basis across all devices so that every device has a unique local admin password. Another scenario where this feature has turned out to be very useful is the help desk scenario. So if I'm a help desk person and one of my users is having a problem with their device, and if I don't want to log on to that device with a corporate account, I can retrieve the password for the LAPS account from the directory and log on that way. And then third, the last scenario where this feature has really proved useful is for the occasional device recovery. So if, for instance, a device takes a bad network driver update and it's locked off the network or can't get on the network, and you're unable to log on, therefore, to the device with a corporate account, you can always log on to a device physically at the console with local accounts. And so that's another scenario where LAPS is really useful. So for all of these reasons, the existing LAPS product has really become part of the security baseline for devices. Now, we shipped this several years ago. It was an add-on package. You can download it in the form of an MSI package from the Microsoft Download Center. And it's been heavily adopted by Microsoft customers. Very, very popular download. The statistics are somewhat amazing considering what this product does. So, but why are we really here today? The first big problem is that many of our customers are moving into the cloud, and they don't want to deploy their devices without the LAPS capability for the reasons I already mentioned. But the existing LAPS product does not support the ability to store passwords in Azure. So that, first and foremost, is one big reason why we're here. And secondly, the existing product is pushing a decade old, and it needs a little bit of attention. So just very briefly going over the goals that we have for this new version of LAPS. We're going to be natively moving it into the operating system. There will no longer be a need to install a separate MSI package. Move it into the operating system has a lot of advantages. It normalizes the patching capability. So rather than having to rely upon customers doing any kind of periodic updates or patches, we can now do that via the normal Windows update channels. It also helps normalize the support channels in case we do need some support situations. I already mentioned that adding support for backing passwords up to Azure is, of course, a big, huge goal of this. Along the way, we're adding quite a few new features. I'm hoping that you'll be enjoying that. Part of the Azure move is that we're modernizing the policy management experience for LAPS. Now, primarily what this means is that you'll be able to manage the LAPS policy settings from the cloud. So there will be, in the Microsoft Endpoint Manager portal, you'll have the ability to configure the various LAPS settings there instead of on the device. And last but not least, we recognize that a lot of our customers have huge deployed install bases of the current existing product, and we wanted to make it very easy to run the new stuff side by side until you can get migrated over. And so you'll see what I'm talking about there. So I don't want you to glaze over. This is not a test, but I did want to give you a quick deep dive insight into the way the product is architected. On the left, we have a managed device. There's a few new binaries that have been added to Windows for this feature. There's a new CSP, configuration service provider. We have a new LAPS PowerShell module. There is a new GPO object for on-premise administration scenarios, and a core logic is contained in a binary called laps.dll. Now, this is a all-in-one diagram where we have two directories over on the right-hand side, Windows Server Active Directory as well as Azure Active Directory. Now, I do want to make a point that the device can back up or manage the local admin account password to one of these directories, but not both. As I said, policies can be managed via Microsoft Endpoint Manager or also via the on-premise group policy. So let's go through what we're adding in the LAPS feature space for Azure Active Directory. So first and foremost, as I mentioned, the device will now have the capability to store passwords in Azure. These are going to be stored on the Azure device object. And we're modernizing the cloud-based management experience. So what does that really mean? In the existing LAPS, of course, you retrieve passwords from Microsoft Active Directory over the LDAP protocol. In this new feature, in the LAPS feature in the Azure space, you'll be retrieving them over Microsoft Graph. There will be an associated RBAC role-based access control policy that is associated with that. Now, it's not yet ready. It's coming later this year, but there will be a first-class password retrieval scenario management experience via the Azure portal. As I mentioned, you'll be able to manage all of the LAPS policy settings via the Microsoft Endpoint Manager portal as well. And one of my personal favorites, this is really cool, if you're managing a device's LAPS settings from the cloud, you will have the ability to do an on-demand password rotation on a device from the MEM portal. All of this does also work for hybrid devices. So if you have devices that are joined to both Azure Active Directory and on-premise Active Directory, this scenario will work. You can configure those hybrid devices to back up their passwords to Azure. That will work just fine. We have a client-side feature. This is not really a cloud feature, and it's valid for the on-prem scenarios too, but it's security improvement designed to limit password exposure after use. I'll be talking a little bit more about that later on. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of where we're going with the Azure features for local administrator password solution. Built into Windows, it'll just work. It's really cool. Wanted to give you a quick taste of what the management portal experience might look like. Now, this is the manual experience view. You can see there, though, that the various settings are all configurable right now via MEM, via custom OMA URI settings. Now, this is a short-term solution. There is a first-class rich experience that will be coming online later this year. All right, let's talk what we've done for LAPS in the Windows Server Active Directory space. We recognize that a lot of our customers are still running hybrid environments and will be doing so for many years to come. We wanted to make sure we provided for both cases, really kind of a cater to all of the above approach. And so if you're surprised to see new AD features being talked about, that is the reason why. So what did we do in the Windows Server AD space? As I mentioned, we've got a new group policy object and we've got new Active Directory schema attributes. You might ask, why did we need these when we already had that stuff in the legacy LAPS product? Well, quite honestly, we're adding a lot of new features to this new version of LAPS, and for various reasons, we did not want there to be any conflict, overlap, or intersection between the behavior of the new LAPS and the old legacy LAPS. We will be storing the account name side by side with the password. The old legacy LAPS product only stored the password. You had to guess or infer or go look at the policy to figure out what the account name was. Now we have that stored side by side with the password, so there's no guessing or looking up. The account name and the password come together as a matched pair. I should add, that's also there in the Azure support as well. Support for password encryption. So in the legacy LAPS product, the password is stored in clear text in a confidential attribute in Active Directory. And the security of that clear text password depends on proper configuration of the Active Directory ACLs. Perfectly fine approach. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's definitely possible to do that correctly. However, if there's a mistake made in those ACLs, the effects can be catastrophic because if there's a mistake, someone can casually see what the passwords were. Now they have a local administrator backdoor route into any of your devices in your enterprise. So password encryption is one of the most requested features, and let me just talk a little bit about that. The feature is based on the Data Protection API, and you configure the policy to tell us which group or user you want to be able to decrypt the password. Now, once you've done that, the device decides to rotate the password. The device will encrypt the password, and then it will, before it ever leaves the device, and then it will be stored in Active Directory in the encrypted form. The clear text password never leaves the device, only the encrypted blob. This does require a 2016 domain functional level for your DCs. That's not arbitrary. There's some functional reasons for that. I always get asked, where are the keys stored? This is not a LAPS-specific encryption feature. This is the standard Active Directory DP API mode. And when you use DP API in this mode, the keys are actually stored on your domain controllers and they replicate around the domain. So the keys are very secure. They're just as secure as your domain controllers, actually. We have password history support. This is another oft-request feature. If you've enabled password encryption, you can then additionally enable password history up to a maximum of 12 stored passwords. And the device, as it keeps rotating the password on a regular basis, will keep a rolling buffer where the up to that number are still stored in the directory, the previous 12 or whatever you configure it to be. Why would this be useful? If you were restoring a device from backup media, for instance, and let's say the backup media is 6 months old or something, and you can't get into the device with a corporate account, and the device has rolled its local administrator, its LAPS account password multiple times since 6 months ago. So what do? With the password history support, you can just go look up what the right password would be at the time the backup media was taken, and now you can get into the device. We've added support for managing directory service repair mode accounts on domain controllers. We know that many customers have existing best practices or automation for how they manage their DSRM accounts. Some customers aren't so great at that. There's multiple methods already for managing DSRM accounts. What this does, it gives you a third option. I will mention that DSRM account password backup does require password encryption. We'll never back up DSRM passwords in the clear, so it does have that requirement. Brand new PowerShell module. This is actually shared. The commandlets in the module are actually shared with both the Active Directory scenario as well as the Azure AD scenario. Few of the things that it does. For easier management, we now have a LAPS property page in the Active Directory users and computer snap-in, and the same automatic password reset feature on use. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through a few of the management elements that are visible in the product just to give you kind of a taste. This is the new on-premise group policy object. You'll see that if you're familiar with legacy LAPS, you'll see that there's quite a few new settings. The one that I've got pulled up here in the screenshot is the kind of the one where everything kicks off from here. This is the first one you touch. You can't configure the feature to back up the password simultaneously to two directories. So you must choose one or the other. And this configure password backup directory is where you would make that choice. And I just wanted to also mention that we have pretty much 100% management parity between the on-prem group policy object as well as the Intune CSP settings, which is kind of nice. If you have hybrid devices, it's really your choice as to which one fits your deployment better. The new LAPS client in Windows has its own dedicated event log channel, and you can view anything that's happened with respect to LAPS in that channel at any time. I mentioned automatic password reset. We call this post-authentication actions. If the password is reset by the device per the normal expiry, say on day 1, and then it's used by a help desk admin on day 2, and the password roll interval is 30 days, that means for the next 29 days, the password could potentially be out there available in the clear. So many customers have asked us for something to alleviate this, and what we've done is we've come up with a feature where the Labs client is monitoring for use of the managed account. And if it detects such authentication, you can configure it to take certain actions. So you can see the options listed there. The first one is reset the password. We can reset the password and log off any interactive logon sessions that we detect. And if you really want to be draconian about it, you could reset the password and reboot the device. I do want to point out this is not any defense against a malicious admin who gains access to the Labs managed account password. Because you're giving them an administrative backdoor into the device, they can defeat this. So this feature is really more intended for capping the visibility, the exposure of the password after it's been used. So you wouldn't want to give, most tasks that Labs is involved in, the person who's logging in with the Labs managed account password, these don't require hours and days of time. So you could say, okay, I'll give you 8 hours and then we're going to reset the password. I mentioned the new property page. This is a quick glimpse of it. You'll be able to see the current password expiry timestamp. You'll be able to set it to an expire now. This works the same as it did in Legacy Labs, where setting it expire now really updates the expiry timestamp in the directory, and then the device will later wake up and read that. I also talked about we have the account name side by side with the password. You can see that here. You can just hit the copy button. It'll put it on the clipboard. Or if you want to see it directly, you can click show and it'll hide and unhide it. New PowerShell module. So without going into detail on all of these, some of these are very similar to their counterparts in the Legacy Labs PowerShell module. The first commandlet listed there, get Labs AAD password. This is intended for the Azure administration scenario when you want to query passwords from Labs. I encourage you to take a look at the Labs Azure demo. You'll be able to see that working. There's a diagnostics commandlet, which collects traces and other things. The fourth one down, get Labs AD password. This just does what you would think it would do. It queries Labs passwords from the directory over LDAP. The reset Labs password, what this does is, if you have a need to do an immediate reset of the password and you have access to the device, you can tell the local Labs client in Windows now, reset the password right now, no questions asked. I wanted last to talk a little bit about some of the migration scenarios we have. Many of you will have really large existing legacy Labs deployments, and we've built in support to this new Labs client in Windows to support the legacy Labs policy settings. We call this legacy Labs emulation mode. So we will honor the legacy Labs GPO settings. When you configure it, the new Windows Labs to do that, we will operate over the legacy Labs schema element. So we're updating the MS ADM PWD password type schema. Now, there is one limitation, which is that if you want the new Windows Labs client to do that, you cannot have the Legacy Labs MSI package installed. And the reason for this is very obvious. You can't have two parties that are trying to manage the same password for the same account at one time. There can only be one, and so therefore, if we detect that Legacy Labs is installed, we will self-disable the new Labs client, and it will let the Legacy Labs client take over. There's only limited administrative support built into Windows. We did not include the Legacy Labs password UI, so if you want to use that UI, you can. But you'd have to still install the Legacy Labs software separately. The limited support, the get Labs AD password, will query the Legacy Labs password attribute. So we're really wanting this emulation mode to be a short-term aid as you're folding this new feature into your deployment or your environment. It's really recommended, though, that you move to the new Windows Labs config, especially for the Azure support, or if you're still backing passwords up on-premise Active Directory, you definitely want to be able to take advantage of the password encryption as soon as you can. Just a quick wrap up. So we're very excited and we're hopeful that you are too. It'd be great if you can start trying out some of these features. Definitely take a look at some of the Labs technical takeoff demo videos. It'll really bring home a lot of what I've talked about in this presentation. The bits are currently available in the Windows 11 Insider client and server SKUs. I did want to mention one limitation. The Azure scenarios that I've talked about today are currently in private preview. I know that's frustrating. They will be opening up more at the end of the year. Tentatively, we're planning to ship all this first quarter of 2023. If you have questions that I have not answered in this presentation, I encourage you to go take a look at the documentation links that I've got here on the screen. Tons and tons more information there that will help answer your questions. Definitely, we're looking for feedback. This is a really big change in the lab space. We're really excited about it, but we're happy to learn and get feedback from our customers. I've got my email address there on the screen. Please feel free to use it. With that, I think I'm all done. I hope you enjoyed the deep dive. This is a huge improvement in the local administrator password solution space. This is going to be awesome, and hopefully you'll like it too. Thank you.